And here we are. Late.
We are.
Arrived.
Well, you can be late or you can be not at all. We chose to be late.
That's right.
So that's a more responsible option, I think.
Yeah. This is your bi-monthly Bad Internet Friends Biffcast. We're not quite a podcast yet. We are a stream.
Yeah.
We're here to answer your questions and pander to the audience. And tonight we're actually talking about something close to Ivan's heart, and I have no idea at all whatsoever.
You've painted some. So we're going to talk about historical wargaming, but you've painted some dudes. I've seen them.
It's true. Yeah. No, I've definitely dabbled in history.
Yeah. So everyone has dabbled a little bit in history since you live in the same world it took place in. So
I in the description I promised we would talk about the War of 1387. Which I made up as a number, but turns out it actually was a war.
Oh, who was fighting?
Oh, let's see. It was the War of Castile, I believe.
Castile, maybe?
Castile.
I think I've played them in Europa Universalis.
Maybe it was 1367. Not 87.
Oh, I'm sure there were some people who were still kind of having it out in 87. Old habits die hard.
The internet says it was a quiet year.
All right. Well, that makes it an easy year to build a war games army for. Just paint some dudes who are standing around with their spears.
That's right. Peaceful times. Just do some farming.
Yeah, which is probably dangerous enough in itself.
Those turnips aren't going to grow themselves.
Absolutely. Plus wild pigs and like belligerent German squirrels or whatever there's a lot of worries and risks in medieval Europe. It's a dangerous place.
Absolutely. Okay, so what do you got for us this fine evening?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I think I've told this story before, but I don't know if I told it on stream here. But when we were sort of serious, teenagers, and we were sort of seriously getting into gaming, we didn't really consider that there were different kinds of gamers. We knew there were different kinds of games. There were miniatures games, role-playing games, and cards and board games and LARPs and all this stuff. And we just wanted to play all of it. We mostly played miniatures and RPGs. But if there was a game, we wanted to play it. And that extended to we wanted to play sci-fi stuff, less fantasy, but we still wanted to play that. We wanted to play historical stuff. If it was out there, we were just, eager and excited. And it was kind of when the internet was becoming more of a thing. So you could learn about all these games that we then wanted to play and usually couldn't because the stores couldn't order them because the internet was there, but it wasn't cool yet. So it always surprised me later on when I would talk to people who were gamers and I would just assume that if you played Vampire or Dungeons and Dragons, then obviously you also played Warhammer, but that was not the case. Or just because you can play board games, there's no guarantee you have a Magic the Gathering deck. And the same thing applied for miniatures gaming. Just because you play science fiction games doesn't mean you play historicals or the other way around. So it was always a bit of an adjustment of this is how normal people think about games, because most people don't have time to do everything, and they are weirdos who want to play the same thing more than once. But the other thing that happened is this kind of coincides with me moving to the United States, but it wasn't specifically because of that. We had dabbled mostly in World War II stuff, but I started getting the interest in the First World War as well. And we played a little bit of stuff. And after I moved, it was right around the time when 4th edition 40K came out. And I was pretty burned out. We had played throughout all of 2nd and 3rd edition. And by the end of 3rd edition, I was kind of done with it. So 4th edition came out and was just kind of more of the same. It was better, but it was still kind of more of the same thing. So I was kind of looking for something that would be something different. And at the same time, I started just really getting the passion for, especially World War I and the Russian Civil War. So that's when I really started really considering myself more of a historical gamer and started kind of switching more to that. Not letting go of sci-fi, obviously, but just focusing more my personal gaming became more historical stuff. And then now that write a lot of games for work, it's obviously very heavily sci-fi based. So it's kind of, my personal gaming has always been historically oriented for the last like 20 years, and more so these days because it's more relaxing in a way. But it's also something where I can like, well, I guess we'll talk about that. But that's like my sort of history or path into historical gaming, how it came about. Like a lot of people, started with sci-fi games and Warhammer 40K, basically. But then worked its way around to historical gaming and kind of didn't end up there, but like that's been kind of the bigger house for a while. Now you don't really play historicals, but you have painted some little historical guys. How did that come about? Was it just for a like something new to paint?
Probably.
Well, you were
like
there.
Tanks. I mean, I love tanks. I love these little tanks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is a T-54-1, I think. Has a little gun sticking out the back. I don't care about any of the wars in a gaming sense. Like, I think they're very important, the wars, but to play a war doesn't really interest me. But the stuff in the war interests me. So
it's hard to resist a tank.
Yeah, when I'm playing Flames of War, I'm not thinking, oh, I'm reenacting this one battle that happened. In my mind, I'm not playing any battle that ever happened. We're just playing with these cool miniatures.
Yeah.
And I have like a really big separation.
War, basically.
Yeah, exactly. We're playing a game to me. Like whenever it comes to anything based in real life, to me, it's always just a game. It's not.
Yeah. Well,
it doesn't fuel my imagination. And I also don't want to, like, I'm not trying to project myself into how the people felt or anything like that, which is horrifying.
Yeah. Well, yes. Well, that's one of the things that the more you learn about it, it always like surprised me. I don't know that I would say I'm like a pacifist specifically, but I'm certainly like view towards that. And I think part of that is like just reading about and realizing like what it was actually like for some of these people. And you can only like kind of imagine, you know, like if you haven't been like shot at, hopefully you never have, you can't imagine what it's like sitting in like a pit somewhere with like bullets flying around you. And
yeah, pellet guns can't break skin for the most part. I'm fine.
No, they're still pretty scary on the receiving end. So, you know, like you can't really like fully understand, but you can sort of get a grasp of it. And the lesson seems to be from every like conflict ever that it's pretty fucking awful. It's actually like a really bad deal to go run after those things. But I think there is I think this is definitely like I don't know what you would call like a minority view with historical games, but it is a view out there that like, yeah, they are games. Like you're sitting down and playing a game and pushing around plastic soldiers, and they have specific like stats because this tank was like that in real life, but they don't really mean like more than that. It's not standing in for like the heroic effort of Third Guard Shock Army or whatever. Like it's just a playing piece that has +1 to hit and armor piercing 3 or whatever the game, however the game works. It kind of leads into it because I know there are people who will like make up their own countries and they'll just use, so they might have like Japanese infantry and like Soviet tanks because that just looks good together, and they'll just use those. But it's their own country and like their own made up world, so it's almost like an anime kind of thing. Imaginations.
Yes, sir.
Imagine. Which I think was like invented by people who wanted to play Napoleonic games, but they didn't want to like research actual Napoleonic uniform to get like the cufflinks right or whatever.
Oh yeah.
So now, as far as like painting historical stuff, because you know, like you can paint a space marine kind of any way you want. If you want it to be like an ultramarine, there's kind of like ways to paint an ultramarine that makes it an ultramarine. But if you just want to paint a space marine, you can paint them in like any way you want. But if you're painting like, I think you did some like World War II Italians, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Like Flames of War guys, I assume. And for them to be like World War II Italians, you know, there are like certain ways they should look and certain colors. And so how did you feel about that? Or did you even do that at all?
Yeah, I kind of went with, mostly I only got the tanks painted. So it's, you know, very easy. Like Italian tanks just look desert colored. It's not a challenge. However, I do have one video from quite a ways back where I painted some GHQ Vietnam, like American Vietnam era troops.
Yeah, they're like
in desert colors. Yeah, and gave them desert racing. And some people liked it, and other people like, why are they desert colored? Like, well, I wasn't going to use them in a Vietnam War game. I just wanted that era of troop on a little base.
Some Peter Pig Vietnam Americans that I used for as generic like sci-fi troopers because they look kind of cool. They had like big helmets and big machine guns and stuff. They just kind of look cool.
I think though, if I was painting the infantry, which I will eventually for the Italians, I would go with what they would have had as the uniform. So I think the Bersaglieri would have like the black feathers and little.
Oh yeah, you got to do the feathers.
Yeah, but I'm not going to get like too crazy into very specific forms of the uniform because I'm not trying to portray them in the African desert exactly as they were. Just that general kind of scenario.
The idea of like Italian infantry in the desert.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like how you can paint like generic, like, I don't know, like World War II Germans versus like the specific, I don't know, like 37th Infantry Division or whatever. You can just kind of stand them in as. And I think that's one of the things that people can feel kind of discouraged by, is the idea that you can like get it wrong and like super anal retentive nerds will like get in your business over you painted like the rivets the wrong color or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think
all my British tanks are in BEF, two-tone camo.
Yeah.
I just love it. I love the two colors together. So.
Yeah. Although I will say, I think I don't know if the whole like rivet counting thing is as much a thing anymore. Like when I've been to like events and stuff, I haven't really heard it. Although I'm sure if you showed up with like a pink like Nazi army, people would like be weird about it. See, that would be cool. But I think there's a pretty wide range. Like I've shown up. The famous example was like the German uniform color in the World Wars, field gray, Feldgrau, which is like you can go to museums and look at uniforms that's been preserved, and they are like 200 different shades. Some of them are like deep green, some are like flat, like light gray, and everything in between. And I've shown up to like events with like some of the earliest 5-minute Normandy games were like at a local store doing little demos, and I literally just painted my Germans like a flat like slate gray, and absolutely nobody will like complain about it. Maybe it was just because I was running the game and they didn't want to be dicks about it, but I think as long as game.
It's got the wrong color.
I know, like what's the rules like then? Well, it turned out the rules were shit too. But I think as long as you're kind of in the wheelhouse, I don't think anyone is like really going to get in your business. I think people will appreciate it if you're into it and you go the extra step and you get it all, like all the details right, all the belt buckles and straps and all this stuff. If you get that correct because you're really into it, or it's like a specific, I'm doing the 3rd Infantry Division of the BEF or whatever. Like people respect that, but I think that's kind of like an overblown fear. Or maybe like it's worse on the internet because 200 people see your post, there'll be one dude who's an asshole, right?
That's right. Skis is just mentioning that he gave all the exact reasons why he's never that interested in historical games.
Yeah, well, that's fair.
The uniform thing.
Oh yeah. I think you sort of get the hang of it. I think it's more. I get intimidated by like Napoleonic stuff because those uniforms are like they're both really beautiful, and you can't get away with just covering them in mud. If you're painting anything from the 20th century, if you mess it up, just like apply mud and dirt all over it. That's what they would actually look like anyway. But maybe hopefully I can share a few things about why historical games are actually really cool. I guess we can start in like a practical sense of like the miniatures, since that's what we're kind of talking about. But I think one of this may actually be a bad selling point to like people who are likely to listen to this podcast stream thing. We're just going to call it a podcast until like people change the definition of podcast to include streams.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how language works. You can just say something and suddenly like everyone says it. It's on TV.
Yeah.
But one of the cool things is that you are never really, even if you're buying miniatures for a specific game, like Bold Action or Flames of War, you're not really buying miniatures for that game. Like if you're buying like a box of like U.S. infantry, they're just a box of U.S. infantry in whatever scale you bought them in. You can take those exact figures and you can go play Bold Action or Chain of Command or anything you want with them. And that goes for like any scale, like I've owned quite a few Battlefront figures, and I've never played Flames of War with them. Not that I dislike it or whatever, but at the time we were playing Crossfire and something else. Troops, Weapons, and Tactics is what we were playing. And that's what those figures went into. But Battlefront still got paid, and they were perfectly good deals for those like platoon blister packs they used to have. You just got everything you needed in like one little pack. But that's kind of I think one of the first things, especially if you're coming from something like Warhammer, where like for sci-fi games, there's a lot of figures that obviously are like pretty universal, but for sci-fi games, it's more likely that there are bespoke figures you're supposed to buy. And conversely, you can have figures that kind of only go in one game. Like if you ever bought like War Machine figures, a lot of like the big, Magic, Steam robots or whatever, they're kind of hard to. A lot of games that don't have anything that like fits into.
Yeah.
So you end up with a figure, or like really weird, like some of the really like specialized like Tyranid figures and stuff. They can be kind of hard to find a role for in another game. But with a historical figure, that's never going to be the case because they're like, they're an actual thing. The worst case, you may have to find like stats for that one tank, but that's not that difficult. If you have the stats for one tank, you can kind of figure like what's close enough. But you're never going to be in a position where you bought like some, I don't know, Napoleonic miniatures and they can only be used playing black powder because it's just not a thing.
Yeah.
So I think like the figure choice, and it also worked, like I was talking to a friend of mine today because he was curious about buying some bolt action stuff. And I was mentioning, well, you can also look at like War Games Atlantic stuff. And there's other, like it all kind of goes together. So you have more choices in a way that if you're used to 15mm sci-fi, like we talked about last time, you're already on board with that because you're doing that anyway. But I think for people coming from other fantasy or sci-fi games, that can be a really powerful thing to kind of realize like, oh, I can just get the dudes I want. I can get the stuff I want. And in a way that is completely independent of the rules you want to play, as long as you and the people you're playing with are building the same scale and basing, in a compatible way, it doesn't matter. You can switch rules. It's not a big deal. If you start off playing bolt action, but you decide later you would rather play, you should play History Dash. That's a great game.
I heard it's good.
Yeah. I heard the writer is kind of a dick though, but what are you gonna do?
Paints his guys gray.
What the heck? But you can just take your stuff and you can go play the other game. Maybe at most, if the other game has like the army's a little bigger, a little smaller, a little different. So like if you've been building bolt action squads that are like small, and you move to History Dad, you might want to like bulk them out to full squads. But you just buy like a couple of guys. You don't have to like start your army over. Then later you decide you want to play like chain of commands and you want to play like full platoons with some support, and you're already there. You can take all that stuff with you. Like the same armies that I originally had based for like Spearhead got used in like Command Decision and Crossfire and a bunch of stuff. So your stuff goes with you to a bunch of other games that you can play completely independently. Like it's really your army and then what you choose to do with it, which I think is really powerful. And again, it exists for sci-fi and fantasy, but a little less just because you can get more out there figures. Like the more basic your stuff is, like if you just have some elf like soldiers, archers and spearmen, you can kind of use them in any game. But that, the game might not have a rules for like your whatever. You have an elf and like a Pegasus or something.
Yeah.
So I think that's like a really powerful. You just get to carry all that stuff over, and like you don't have to like restart your investment, because that's the other part is, especially with like sci-fi stuff. And if you bring your army with you into another game, it may be the same miniatures. They may kind of be the same thing in your head, but in the rules, they're not necessarily like the same army. They might be, like a lot of people if you're buying. Or you get into something like, I'm just going to show myself here and say like 5 parsecs tactics. Your human infantry are probably going to be like Unity grunts. So they're not quite the same as what they were when you played like Star Grunt, where they were like, I forget the factions they have, but like those guys, Eurasian, Solar Union, or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, they could be. That's up to you, but it changes a little bit. The stats will kind of change the way they perform. A lot of times people will want to translate like their space marines into other systems. But those systems don't really like make a Space Marine work the exact same way that they do in Warhammer, because they just have different priorities. Whereas if you're bringing your like Soviet army with you, they're always going to be a Soviet army. They may still perform a little differently in the new game you're playing or the game you're switching to, but they're fundamentally still like a Soviet army. Like it's the same army. You got to take it with you. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of a abstract point, I think.
Well, yeah. Soviet army does what it says on the tin because everyone's building a system to accommodate the Soviet army.
Yeah,
but not
because
every sci-fi game is building a system to accommodate the genetically engineered super soldiers who can spit acid and have
Yeah,
five
yeah.
hearts. And
Although I think nowadays everyone does kind of have that, so maybe that's like old thinking. But yeah, so I think that's like a really powerful thing as like a builder and a collector. The second big advantage I would say is, and this is going to be a little like school teacher or like a dad, so skis in the chat, you should pay attention here, is that two things. One, you can actually learn something. You don't really have to. You can know nothing about history and still play a historical game. That's fine. But odds are, even if you didn't intend to, you're going to pick up something along the way. Maybe it's just some dumb detail about like how Italian tanks work or something, or like you know now what the well, like you know now what the camouflage scheme is, or like what one of them was. That's like a little thing. But maybe you kind of get, you look up one day and you're like, oh, I wonder like how this tank came about. Like, so you look up like how it was developed or something, or you read up a little bit because you want to figure out like which armies are these guys supposed to be fighting and what does that look like. So you get like a book, an Ospreys on like Operation Crusader or something. Like I think a lot of people get discouraged from historical gaming because they think that they have to like jump. You have to kind of know everything up front and at once. But a lot of times it doesn't necessarily work that way, especially if you're doing like skirmish gaming or something where you don't need like huge armies. You don't have to understand how it all works. You can kind of just jump in, play some games, and then you can learn at your own pace. And you might find out like some people will just like stick to their armies. So just like read about like how, the Soviet army works or whatever. Or you read about like, there's some people who just play like North Africa. So they just want to read about, that campaign and how that worked and the commanders and the units that were there. But you might also get a further interest in like the whole war, as a whole. Or you might find that since I'm reading all this, you realize what you really have a passion for is like some connected thing to it. You might get really into like knowing how like factories worked or like industrialization and like, like there's almost everything. How women's rights came about during the wars and stuff like that. I'm going to just rely on World War II as the example because just to have this could literally apply to any other conflict. So, but it's just an easy like shorthand. And that's something that you can kind of like go. Like it's never like a bad thing, or it's never wasted time to learn something about the world. But I think that can be really powerful if people are interested in that. And it's something that you could do anyway. Like there's nothing that stops you from going to the bookstore and getting like a book about like, the Canadians in World War II in your case. You could do that right now, but you might not be that motivated. However, if you're like painting up some Canadians, you might be a little more motivated, like get it right, or just understand what those guys mean. Or what they went through, or even just where they went, what they did. And like the second part to that is kind of, if you have a family connection, obviously it's a way to like delve into that. Like I know, especially this seems to be more of a British thing, but I know there are people who like build the specific like regiment or battalion or whatever that their like grandfather or great grandfather was in. That's pretty common. Or people will play, like. Again, especially if you're like in a Commonwealth nation, it's very likely that you have family that were involved in both world wars. So maybe that's a way to like connect with your family, go back and say, okay, I'm building like this army. I'm going to read up on this. And it turns out, great grandpa was a tanker in this, regiment or whatever. So it's a way of like understanding like some family aspects a little bit more and kind of like putting those things together. And if like a dumb little game with like plastic tanks helps with that, I think that's like a really cool thing. It isn't, like if you're like me and you've grown up in a country that haven't been at war since 1864, other than like being invaded in World War II, you don't have that, but that doesn't mean you can't go, like you can have a connection to places. Like I've always been interested in things that happen in Wales just because I have a friend who's from Wales and he's spoken very fondly of it,
Oh yeah.
Or like you've been to a city that you really liked, so you read up about stuff that happened there. Like it can be anything, but anything that gets you like thinking about it, and just learning more about the world and painting like toy soldiers and playing fun games in the process, I think is really cool. And it's not that you can't like learn about Warhammer stuff, but like, like you could also learn about something that actually did happen.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be a little like snooty there, but.
Yeah, some people get deep into Warhammer lore, which is weird because it changed so much over time.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. The
lore you're really into is just going to change in the future anyway. So
yeah, well, I guess they have this thing where it's like it's all true, both the old and the new version, and the next all is simultaneously true. So you can just like pick the one you like the best. It's like,
which timeline?
It's like making sense of like Doctor Who timelines or something. It's like at some point it all happened, even though none of it could happen simultaneously. So I think that's like I think on the rules side of things, like historical games can have a different approach to them. Some of them can be a little more old school, but I think like you can find stuff that is like the equivalent of Warhammer bolt action. You can find stuff that's more out there. You can find stuff that's very like cutting edge. You can find stuff that's very old fashioned and kind of stuffy. Like there's a wide range of games. I think maybe in a way, historical gaming can be a little more indie. There's obviously big glossy books like Flames of War and Blood and Valor and bolt action stuff like that. Warlord games, basically anything Warlord does, right? Ospreys has a lot of reasonably glossy books, but there's also like super indie stuff. Like you'll go if you have a club where you live. There's a fair chance they're playing a game that literally just exists from like a notepad that they've been playing for like 20 years, and nobody understands how the rules work because the guy who wrote it and gave it to them like died in 1992. They've just been rolling like morale checks ever since. But you can find like I think to an extent it's almost more common for people to like cook up their own like rules for historical stuff because people have like very specific ideas about what they want. So in a way, if you're really into like the indie aspects of miniatures gaming, I think it could be really powerful in that sense. And it's like very, very, I think, accepted as well that players are just going to make adjustments to the rules and change stuff because they are going to like disagree about how this tank works, or they're going to disagree about how like morale checks work or something. So, which again you get in sci-fi games and fantasy games, but I think there's a tendency, especially for like if you're coming from like glossy games like Warhammer, there's kind of like a hesitation to house rule stuff these days. I think, but people want.
One big difference has got to be there's not like a huge competitive scene for historicals, is there? Like,
not in the
bolt action
level.
Might be like the closest.
Yeah, I know Flames of War used to have tournaments. I assume bolt action does. However, I don't think it's to the level of like Warhammer tournaments. It's the impression I get is the bolt action tournaments now is more like Warhammer tournaments were like 20 years ago, where it was really more like it's still like you're competing, but it was really more just about going to an event and like playing a bunch of different guys that you don't normally play against. So there's a little, you'll see people talk about it a little bit, but not to the same extent. But I think you're right. Like without a competitive scene and like a meta that everyone has to like try to meet and stuff, it's a little more freeform, even if it's points during game, which is no guarantee. People are just a little more open-ended with it. I think there's a little more understanding of like, hey, let's play this game, but for this game, we're going to change like artillery to work like this. So it is a little more, I guess independent is a good, like players are just a little more in control of things. Of course, if you write your own game, you're like literally in control of it. So,
and then when you get the rules wrong.
Yeah,
I wrote it.
Yeah, I was just playtesting the next version. But I think obviously there's also, I think there's a lot of, I hesitate to say misconceptions, even though that's what I wrote on my notepad or index card here. So I'm going to say perceptions instead. I think there are some perceptions of historical gaming that doesn't do it any favors. I think there's definitely like a perception that it's very stuffy and boring. I think a lot of people feel that if there's not like magic spells or like 200 different types of Space Marine or whatever, then it's going to be boring because it's just like dudes. And I think, and it's almost in a way like that's not entirely wrong because like even in like World War II, you're not going to have like 50 different types of infantry. If you're playing like Italians, you're going to have like the dudes with the feather hats, and you're going to have like regular guys in black shirts, and like maybe you have a couple more. And you can change up their like stats or quality or stuff a little, but they're all kind of going to be like dudes. But I think for a lot of historical games, the flip side of that is that it relies a little more heavily on like the tactics and the sort of the tactical interaction. Like it's very rare for a historical World War II game to not have, like suppressing fire mechanics and stuff like that. So there's a bit more, you take a little bit of a step back in like the army detail, but then the rules usually have a little more like to them, or like artillery fire is much more of a thing. You can play like a lot of Warhammer games that just don't have artillery at all. You're not really going to play like a World War II game beyond like a certain level without having artillery.
You have the meme of the guy in the tank. He's like, drive me closer so I can hit him with my sword.
Yes.
That's not a World War II thing.
Rarely. Although weird things do happen. But I think that can be a bit of and it's not like a wrong perception. I think it's just a perception that I think people shouldn't let like deter them from it. And of course, if you're playing a setting with tanks, you've got like, there may only be 5 types of infantry, but there's like 50 vehicles. Like I've read, I think Command Decision has more like versions of German armored car than like there are Space Marine tanks in like all of Warhammer 40k. It's bananas. Yep. All of which have different models, because you can find models for like everything. So I think that's like the biggest thing that holds people off. I think there can be I don't want to sound demeaning, but there can be like a squeamishness sometimes, especially for like World War II and like Vietnam and stuff, where like those things are like ugly, or they have ugly elements to them, and like some people don't want to like I know people who don't want to game anything that's like after World War II, or they don't want to game things that are like recent, like if you had family that like escaped from like Bosnia or something, you're probably not real keen on like gaming that, right?
Yeah.
Although I knew a guy when I lived in Portland who was a Vietnam vet. I saw like photos, and who did game Vietnam, and he exclusively gamed the VC. It was the strangest thing, but he just like, it was, I don't know if it was like his way of coping with it or showing respect or something. He wasn't like real bitter about his experience, but like it was just a thing. But you can definitely get people who like, they have something they just don't want to play, and I think that's but I think people can sometimes take that to like, if you don't want to play anything that involves like modern conflict, that doesn't necessarily mean you couldn't play like Viking raids or something, or like Napoleonics, or like there's lots you can do. And like if you feel that like 20th century conflict is like a little too gritty and grim, which it often is, you could, again, like you could play knights or something. Not that like the Crusades or something are like real peachy and flowers, but there's something else out there. You can play Napoleonics, or you can play like American Revolution or something. Like I think almost no matter like what your sort of exclusion is, you can find something that would be okay with. Or you could play Pirates. That's like a historical game. It's kind of a made up one, but like pirate games are out there.
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
What is that? Blood and Plunder?
Black Seas? Blood and Plunder?
Yeah, there's a couple. There was a little like X-Wing one. What was it called? I don't remember what it was called.
Pirates aren't my thing.
Yeah,
I think pirates are cool, but I never. It's one of those things I never want to game.
Yeah, it wasn't really my thing either. I just know for a while there was like one that was really popular with like little pre-painted ships.
Yeah.
Which I guess is like the flip side. Like historicals don't have to be like real serious, and they don't have to be like all that historical either. Like you can play something that's a little more, like swashbuckling kind of games are technically historical, like Three Musketeers kind of stuff, but they're not really like hardcore like realism or anything. You can be kind of goofy. You can make like a game that is basically like like a 60s like or 50s World War II movie where the heroes are mowing down like Nazis by the bucket load. Like that's still a historical game. It's just not a realistic one. That doesn't have to be.
Kind of divulges into the pulp kind of aspect, right?
Yeah,
because pulp is based in reality to a degree, but then they usually have like a little twist.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about it the other day actually, because I was rewatching some Indiana Jones, and it's funny because like much of Indiana Jones, almost no matter which of it you take, is like it's not realistic, but it's like in a real setting, and then suddenly you get like the voodoo priest or whatever. So, but it's like they keep it kind of limited. Like Raiders of the Lost Ark, the magic stuff doesn't really happen until like the literal very end.
Yep.
Like so.
Shocker.
Yeah, and you could do like there were old school like pulp stories that didn't really have like magical stuff. So you could have, like, you could do Raiders of the Lost Ark, and at the end it's like just a treasure. Like that would still be a fun, exciting adventure where Indiana Jones gets to like punch Nazis and stuff. But it's, you know, it's historical. It's just not like realistic in that sense. So I think historical games can be wider and more exciting than I think people sometimes, if you're sort of under the assumption that they're all like stuffy and boring. I mean, heck, if you did a game that was like James Bond is, I guess, historical. You know, James Bond is pretty exciting. You get to paint like a little Sean Connery.
There we go.
Somebody should do a like licensed James Bond game, and you have stats for like each version of James Bond from the movies.
Yeah, I guess 7TV is the closest that they get.
Yeah, that could totally do it. I think there was like a Doctor Who minis game that I think was based on that. It was like a ripoff. Mm-hmm. But it got like shut down when I think it was Warlord Games, or maybe it was, I don't remember who it was that got to do an actual Doctor Who game, and then nobody played that one. Yeah,
I think it was Warlord. I think they.
It might have been. I don't know if they even like do it anymore. So, but yes, I think this is kind of rambling just because I'm not good at planning stuff.
It's fine.
But I think there's a lot of like different angles you can go to historicals, and I think there's a lot of just really cool, fun, exciting gaming. The other thing is, I think it's often assumed, because when you see, if you're going to show off a historical game, you're going to show one or two things. You're either going to show like a huge like Roman battle with like 1,000 miniatures all ranked up, or you're going to show like it's like World War II Normandy, but it's all like gorgeous terrain, and like all the buildings have like interiors with like posters painted on the walls and stuff. So it can be intimidating that you have to like, it has to look like that, or you have to paint like 1,000 little fuckers. But those aren't true either. You know, like there are skirmish games, and they are actually quite good often. Plus, if you're coming from sci-fi, you're almost certainly going to be like very at home in a lot of skirmish games. You know, like one might almost say that like there's a direct connection between like playing 5 Men in Normandy and 5 Parsecs from Home.
I've heard that.
It's a very fluid transition.
I've never actually read 5 Men from Normandy, so I have no idea.
It was shit. I shouldn't play it.
Some suckers bought it.
Yeah, well, the reason it was called that, this is where the whole like 5 thing, I've said this in interviews before, I don't think we've talked about it here, but like the whole reason was that it was like a joke that whenever you make a game that's supposed to have like a certain amount of stuff on the table, some dork will always try to like triple that. So if you write a game that's supposed to handle like a squad, they'll want to bring like 50 guys. So I was like, if I put in the title how many guys you are expected to have, people can't possibly like fuck this up. That didn't help, but that's why 5 Parsecs is called, because then it was just like a thing. But yeah, so like it doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be like that realistic, really. It can be like fun. I hate fun, but it can be if you want. And it doesn't have to be like painting like 1,000 guys, unless you really want to. If you want to paint like a big ass army with lots of minis, historical gaming will do that, and a lot of sci-fi won't. Fantasy is better because they're still like ranking flanks. But you're not really going to get like a lot of sci-fi games where you get to paint like 300 minis and like use them all, because you have to move all the fuckers one at a time.
Yeah, no, it's insane.
Yeah, like you can put a lot of dudes on like a black powder table or whatever and have a good
Unless
time.
You're doing like 6mm multi-based.
Yeah, what looks really fucking good, and I want to do this someday, is take a game that is meant for like single figures, but replace each of the bases with like 3 guys or something. So instead of like 10 guys in bolt action, it's actually 10 bases with like 3 guys each. So your squad is now like a full platoon. You just play it exactly the way it is. Like if a guy's like wounded, if that's the thing in the game, it's just that like one of those guys is wounded, the other 2 are like helping him. So the whole base still counts as wounded. You don't change any of the rules. You just keep it all the same. But it still like looks really cool. You scale it down. So you can, you might have to, it gets a little weird with like tank scales, because tanks shrink way more if you go from like 20 to 6mm or whatever, but it's a good way of, you could do some bogus stuff, like have 6mm infantry and 10mm tanks or something, so they look like big and big and mean.
Yeah. I think if you just did 15mm that way, it'd be fine on both fronts.
Yeah, because they're still, 15mm tank is still like, you know,
it's a good size on the table.
Yeah, and it's big,
depending on the tank.
Yeah, but it'll be at least like double the size of like a normal base you put them on. So yeah, that will work pretty well. You could also just double them, have 2 15s instead of each 28. So that will still like look nice, because you're basically just like blowing up like the visuals of the game, without like having to change the rules or play a more complicated game.
It'll make the tank seem a little bit scarier too. I mean, as many guys.
Oh yeah, like your machine gun like knocks out like 15 dudes in one turn. Like that looks looks way more bloody.
One thing, because I've been listening to a lot of things lately that are about a month back on, and everyone's talking about bolt action because it was being released like a month ago.
The new version.
Yeah. They keep talking about armored cars, and I don't know what it is, but I just love the idea of an armored car on the table.
They're basically just armored cars. Are like we're gonna have like a segment like Ivan rambles about stupid shit.
Yeah, no, so stupid. I love them.
So an armored car, they date back to like pre-World War One. They had them in like 1914, but they are literally just like a motor vehicle with like wheels and thin armor plating. Usually like a turret too. Like even the really early ones, they just have like a machine gun in a turret, and you get a little dude up there and like mow down horses or whatever he's doing. And they kind of stick around because they don't require they have really thin armor, so the demands on the engine aren't that big. They can go quite fast with like engines of the time. And they're mostly for like either road networks or like fairly like flat ground. They don't really have like real good suspensions. So it's kind of a rough ride. They're basically for like reconnaissance. You can support infantry with them, just kind of harass and like bother. Some even had like 20mm cannon or stuff on them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they're really cool. I have I don't know where it is. I have for my 20mm World War II guys, I have a Stackhound armored car, which is like little. It looks really cool. It has like a 2-pounder cannon on it. So yeah, armored cars are the shit. And they go so well in like a skirmish game. You have like a bunch of infantry and like a light tank or like a couple of armored cars, and it's like a scout patrol that's like fighting each other and stuff. So, and there's like a lot of like the Germans have like tons of them. They're all really cool.
That and trucks. I just love the trucks.
That's the thing you never get to paint. Like nobody makes like space trucks or something. Maybe they should have trucks. But yeah, there's so many like just if you want to paint just like a Renault or something, or the little like Jeeps and I forget the German Jeeps, but there's lots of like weird little vehicles you can paint up that you don't usually get to, and they are cool for like either just to paint or like put on the table as an objective or something. Or you're like commander can zoom around in a Jeep.
You park it over beside the artillery, and that's about it.
Yeah, it just looks cool, you know. I knew one guy who, I forget what game he played, but he had armies, and he would always just put like a little truck model or some little like horse carts or whatever next to his artillery pieces, and they were usually just there for like to look cool. They didn't really like play a role in the game in most systems, so it was nice to have. It's like dudes who will paint like little casualty guys to mark like morale checks or something.
Yeah.
When I played Crossfire, I had painted up little casualties, so we put one casualty next to a stand if they were pinned and 2 if they were suppressed, or the other way around. I always wanted to do one of those games where you play like a skirmish game and you replace each guy with like a casualty figure when he dies.
Oh yeah.
It might be kind of bloody minded, but it would be cool. Just like you can see like the trail of the dead as you like
walk the attrition.
Yeah. You like walked them into disasters.
That'd be great in rank and flank. Take your dudes off the base, replace them with casualties.
Oh yeah,
behind as you go towards.
Yeah, you can see like the trail, and then suddenly there's like a whole pile of them because that's where they fucked up. So yeah, I guess like my sort of conclusion, I guess, is like don't be afraid of like diving into something. Don't be afraid of like starting with something easy and maybe a little lighthearted. Don't be afraid of thinking you have to paint like a huge army. Just kind of go in. Like historicals can be as friendly, or even more so than sci-fi games sometimes. Because like I said earlier, even if you realize you hate the game you started with, you can just take your minis and go play something different. Nobody's gonna. You have to like if you play in a club, you are stuck playing whatever they're playing. So have fun playing bolt action, but. But you know, like sometimes you can in a lot of clubs and stores stuff, you set up and run the game, you know, people will play like what you're bringing, or you can just build both armies. That way you can always like I've always been in a position, almost always, that the people I've taught to do miniatures games have been like role players, so they were not like real inclined to buy armies. And I had mine, so I would just get 2 armies, So, because they would show up and play, they just weren't really the types to like collect miniatures and paint them. So,
yeah, you gotta be that way sometimes. Sometimes you got like this friend. He's like, I really want you to play this game. It's like, okay, I have the miniatures, but I don't have any of the books. I don't know how the game works. Can you just teach me the game? Tell me what I need to build. They're like, no. You got to figure it out yourself. Like, I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna buy this stuff. I don't know if I want to play the game. I got the dudes. Just tell me what to build, and I'll build it.
I had an experience like that where it was two guys. One that was a role player. We had played some board games and stuff, and he was kind of curious about miniatures. And there was a friend of his who I didn't like, but he was okay. Actually, he was a dick, but that's a different story.
He showed up, and that's the important thing.
Yeah, he was there. And they had both gotten the idea. Suddenly, they want to play miniatures games. Like, oh, okay, that's fine. I have some World War II stuff. I have enough like 40K stuff. We could put on a little game. I have some Warzone stuff sitting around. Like, if you guys tell me kind of like, what do you want to play? I'll just bring some stuff over, some terrains, some dice, some minis, and you can kind of like figure out what you want. And they were both like, no, we know. We want to play War Machine. Like, okay, but we don't own any War Machine minis. Like, no, we know. Like, we don't have any terrain for War Machine, really. Like, no, we know. We don't have a rule book. And I'm like, no, we want to play War Machine. That's the only thing we want to play. It'll be cool. I'm like, all right, fine. So I told them, like, you two go out and buy 2 starter sets and like put them together and we'll play. And then once we played, I'll pick out an army and like figure out which ones to play. And we played no War Machine ever. Because it turned out what they wanted was for a different person to play War Machine for them or with them. So that wasn't going to happen. But if you're really into it, like when I was during Russian Civil War, I just built 2 armies. So, we would have stuff. And plus, if you like enjoy the painting and collecting, you just get to do twice as much of it.
I've been working on my Clash of Steel stuff, which is just, it's based on Flames of War. It's all tanks. And all you do is just fight tanks. Tanks and tanks. You got like shifting objective cards and stuff. It's actually a pretty cool system. I haven't played it, but like I like the way it operates in theory, at the very least.
I think the Bold Action guys did like a tank game as well. That was just like you have like 1 or 2 tanks. Yeah, and then there was the Two Fat Lardies one. What a Tanker.
What a Tanker. Yep.
Yeah, that one looks really cool. The other one looked like it wasn't really my thing. But those are like, you literally just need like 2 tanks, like 1 or 2. Like I think it was Storm of Steel on YouTube. He was playing a game that was like 1 Tiger versus 2 T-34s, and that was just the game. Yeah. And he's played for like he had a great time.
Nice.
So
I was going to say though, the thing about Clash of Steel is the only way to play it is to buy the starter set. You cannot play it without it. That's where the books and the cards and everything is, and it always comes with 2 factions. So you're always good. Like you always got exactly what you need. Yeah, just say I want to play this game because you won't have any resources. Yeah.
So in that case, you're basically set. I don't know with the Arctic Panzer one if that comes with stuff, but I mean you can just grab a couple of tanks otherwise. I know what a tanker you'll have to go out and get some. But like even if that's the case, like let's say you want like 3 tanks for each player. Like that's in 15mm, you're looking at what, like $45 per player? Like $15 per tank. That's probably.
I don't think you get Zvezda anymore. I think Russia's out. So.
Oh yeah.
The cost has gone up a bit.
Yes. Although you could get there's like the Victrix like plastics in 12mm. Those are very cheap.
Yeah, you could do 12.
So or you could. I remember me and the kid had gotten some like 3mm Pico armor tanks.
Oh yeah.
And we actually played some skirmish games with them because they were just big enough. You could put them on a penny. And like you can still tell them apart because those are like ridiculously detailed. But it was really fun to play with those, and you could literally play on like the back of like a notebook is how small they were. You could draw like take a photo of like a forest and use that as your gaming table.
Yeah, one of the Christmas bonuses one year from Ground Zero Games was a whole bunch of 3mm mechs.
Oh yeah, the I forget the guy's name, but yeah, those were really cool. They had like kind of like rounded like proportions and stuff. They were very cute. Yeah,
they're cute. They kind of fit in 6mm, kind of.
I mean, a robot is a robot.
Yeah.
I think we had that like exact conversation, didn't we? That you can use out of scale stuff for, especially in sci-fi.
Oh heck yeah!
You could even make them into like little like reconnaissance droids for 15mm.
Robots and aliens. You can put them anywhere.
Yeah, basically.
Tiny aliens or giant aliens.
Just make sure the robot doesn't have like a little gun he's holding. So because it looks a little goofy, it's like they built him like a tiny little space pistol. I mean, if he's a little robot, he needs like little stuff. So
yeah, that's right. Can't give him big guns.
No, he can carry the little guy. Help him out a little bit.
No, and balance him, fall over. Jeremy, yeah, that's right.
That is what it is.
He's got it.
Jeremy, yeah. There was another guy too, wasn't there? Because I saw Brigade had just picked up maybe it was the same one. Oh, it might have been. I think they're with Brigade now. They were going to expand them. Either that or there's a different 3mm sci-fi guy out there. But yeah, they're coming back, or something is coming back. So you should be excited.
3mm isn't my thing, so I'm not too sure. But
I kind of wanted it to be my thing, but I like infantry-based games a lot, and 3mm infantry is not real. I do have some World War I guys that I'm gonna. Well, they're kind of generic guys. Well, they are legit World War I guys, but like they are real small. You kind of can't tell a lot of difference. I was gonna do them up for to play. What is it called? Bloody Big Battles or Big Bloody Battles? I forget the game or what the rules are called. And do like 1914, like Austria and Russia. So that's one of the projects. But they are actually small enough that I had spray painted them and put them away somewhere. It's like, and now I don't know where I put them. Like I literally like misplaced the armies. That's the downside of 3mm.
Yeah, they're hiding in the corner somewhere.
Yeah, well, and I had also spray painted like a couple of Road Trader like 40K guys. So you would think that they would all show up, but I don't know where in the house they are. Hopefully the cats didn't eat them. So,
well, but I mean, that's asking a lot of your cats.
Yeah, they're not too bad. We've been teaching. So Lancelot he likes to come up and sit if we're playing a game. He'll sit and watch, and he's pretty good. He doesn't try to like steal stuff. Lawrence is a little more rambunctious, but he's been getting better. Last night I was sitting and playing a board game solo, and he was just kind of sitting and watching. He was like looking real intent when I was getting stuff out of the box and stuff, but he was behaving. He didn't try to walk on the board or swipe the dice or anything. So
that's very nice of him.
Yeah, a little board game kitty. We used to have, when we left board games like set up, we have this system for kitty-proofing the board, which was putting little wooden cubes like around the edges, and then putting a second sheet of plexiglass like on top of it because they won't jump on that. So that way it could be like kitty-proofed.
Nice.
Because otherwise somebody would like go sit on it or something, and like suddenly like the entire eastern front is all mucked up. Terrible.
Catified.
Yes.
Before we sign off, maybe you should tell us about your Nordic Weasel Games offerings on the historical front. So you have Knight Pike Sword, the aforementioned.
Yeah. So now, ironically, Knight Fighting Sword is now becoming a fantasy game. So, but yeah, so Knight Pike Sword is a medieval mass skirmish, as I called it. It's kind of intended to be. I was cheating a little bit because the units are basically like half-sized Lion Rampant units. So Lion Rampant, you need 12 men per unit, and for Knight Pike Sword, you need 6. But it's a true skirmish, so it's if you have 6 guys, they represent 6 actual guys. They can move and fight in units, but a little semi-independently, and it's apparently quite good. If you're a World War II guy, we've bit off that apple quite a few times. 5 Men in Normandy is like the classic one. That's pay what you want, so you can get in, and it's very sort of solo campaign oriented. 5 Men at Kursk is like the glossy deluxe version of that, with a little more stuff. You get tanks. Much nicer like presentation, also more rules, so it's a more built out game. And then the most recent one is History Dad, which was kind of intended as like for people who have been interested in historical games but haven't quite pulled the trigger on it. So it's very pretty simple mechanics. They're still pretty tactical, but they're like on the simple side. There's not that much to learn. Everything's kind of consistent. And they come with a whole bunch of explainers in the rule book. So if you aren't sure like how like infantry weapons work, or like how artillery really does work, or stuff like all that stuff, there are little text boxes explaining like how the war really worked. You don't have to know like what a platoon is, because the book explains that to you. It comes with examples of like for the big 4, German, Soviet, British, and Americans. It comes with platoons and tells you what you need to do. There are stats for tanks. Like everything you need to do. You can even roll up a random army if you prefer doing that, and it's playable solo.
How many miniatures usually get on the table with that one?
So intended for around a platoon level. So if you have like 3 or 4 squads of 8 to 10 guys on a couple of tanks, that's like a pretty good size. That'll give you, and that kind of matches with like if you're coming to or from like chain of command, which is a popular one. Bolt action is technically platoon level.
Okay.
So you can get stuff if you already have an army for like chain of command, you can jump into it straight away with this exact same stuff. But if you're buying from new, if you want to play in 15mm, literally one of those like platoon packs for Flames of War, that will like get you started and buy like 1 or 2 tanks. If you want to play like 20mm, like the Eureka, or I think it's AB miniatures, but Eureka sells them. They have a really nice range. They sell them by the squad, so 1 bag is 1 squad with everything you need.
Okay.
So you buy like 3 of those, find yourself a tank or 2, or an armored car if you're really cool, and you can play History Dad. And there will be a World War I version in the future, and there might also be a Korean War version. World War I is like near and dear to my heart, so that will definitely happen. There will also in the future be the title is not really known yet, but there will be a World War I sort of trench raiding game where you get to like sneak around trenches, which will be a full like solo campaign game. So you get to like play your officer throughout the war and like survive in the trenches, run over and like bludgeon Germans with your mallet or whatever.
So it's the Canadian game.
Yes, absolutely. There's actually a little role-playing game about Canadians in World War I called Ross Rifles. So very much written by somebody who was like real passionate about that one specific topic. So, but yes, there will probably be like a little option in there to play as Canadians because I always try to like that and like Indian Army and World War I is like my pet peeve or my pet stuff.
Oh yes,
you got to have the cool turbans, and they really did wear those. They are not like stereotype or whatever. Like that was actual headgear. Even like officers would wear them because it turns out if you're the one guy wearing the officer's cap, the Germans know which one to shoot.
Yeah, that's right.
But some of them would also just wear them anyway, just to like, even though people were like super racist back then, but there was often like a level of respect at the same time. Like British officers assigned to Indian units would often like have an appreciation for like Indian culture and stuff. So they would like try to adopt some of that, and like wearing the headgear was like a common thing.
Okay.
So yeah, it's super interesting. This is like totally off topic. But there is a really good book called Sepoys in the Trenches, which is like a really good introductory book on the Indian Army in the First World War. And it'll absolutely like change your mind on whatever you thought you knew about the Indians and what they did or didn't do. So.
I know there's so many stories out there you just never really get exposed to.
Yeah, that's one of those things. That's also what, especially when you look at something like World War II, where it's like enormous, or World War I, like it's, literally you could spend your whole life learning about it and there's still something you don't know about. Like if you spent your whole life like learning about the British on the Western Front, then somebody comes and tells you about like this experience that like, somebody in the Chinese Labor Corps had, and it's just completely different. Or, somebody who was like a Hungarian like defector who served in the Russian army. Like there's just so much to it. Like me and the kid just started getting into playing naval war games. That's like a whole different thing. Like all of the things we already knew don't apply anymore because it's a whole different thing, even though it's the same conflict and the same history and stuff, which is cool. Like it's really fun to learn because we're like playing the game and we would then like find a scenario with like real ships, and then we would like go online and look up the ships and like read about them and like what guns they had and when they're built and what actually happened to the real ship that we played in the battle. That was just it's like, yeah, it was really cool. It's like it kind of, it's like finding something new and like just learning about it. But it was really cool to like do that thing where you play the game and then you put it into like, oh, this was a real ship with real people on it, which again, you don't have to do, but it's really cool that you can. And I think it can be really powerful. You kind of learn something. You start getting weird because you'll get like have a favorite ship or whatever.
Yeah. There's you have other games though, right? Like Insight. You have the Insight games. One of them at least should be semi-historical.
Yeah. So No End in Sight is kind of platoon level. It's really Cold War. So set up for like more like Vietnam era, Cold War, like gone hot kind of stuff. That was kind of a way to make a game that was like ultra realistic, but without being real complicated. I sometimes joke that it's like unpleasant to play because you have to deal with like soldiers who get wounded and have to be recovered. Your squads will be pinned down. Your guys will get like, they won't be able to cross the street because they come under pinning fire. And your troops get exhausted and stuff. It's a fun like misery, but it's like meant to be tough and difficult and like scrappy.
Misery simulator.
Yeah, I have had people say there was some blog where this guy, I think, played like the same scenario with like 10 different Cold War and modern era rules, and he concluded No End in Sight was the best one. So
nice.
Random blog dude wouldn't be wrong, right? And we've dabbled a little in Black Powder stuff. We have an older game called From Shaco to Cold Scuttle, which covers kind of like from American Revolution all the way up to technically 1914. But it's really meant for like Franco-Prussian War, American Civil War. That's like stand based, like 4 stands make up a unit, and you have kind of big armies. There was somebody on the Facebook group that was playing, I think, Franco-Prussian War, and looked like he had a grand time. He was doing the thing where, like, putting little cut and puffs in front of like the infantry stands when they were shooting and stuff. So it looked really cool. So yeah, we've dabbled and delved into a lot of things. There's still historical projects I would like to do in the future. World War I
some finished off, maybe like 5 kilometers from Leipzig.
Oh yeah. There is. It's a beta game, although it's being fleshed out, and I want to build it out more in the new year. But yeah, so it's the 5 parsec sort of mechanics, but set up for like generic black powder. So you can technically do like cowboys versus like robbers. You can do a little bit of like colonial stuff, but it's really meant for like skirmish actions. But it's the same sort of thing. We have like a handful of guys, and you name them, they get experience and stuff. So you get to do kind of you can set it up as you can be bushwhackers in like the American Civil War. You can play like sharp rifles and stuff like that. So, So there's some options. Don't let the rules part can be covered real easy. There's even free options out there. Like I said, you can get 5 Men in Normandy for absolutely free. You don't buy like 2 boxes, like 1/72 scale plastic figures, and you can be gaming for $30.
172. It's the scale of so much promise and so many disappointing miniatures.
Yeah, there could be some. When I was building some, I ended up like just using half of what I ended up buying because half of them were good. But they're so cheap that if you're really just on a budget, you don't mind the rifles being kind of bendy. That's always a problem.
And the flash, getting rid of that flash.
So the ones I got I was really lucky, and they had very little. But there's definitely, it depends on what you get. There's definitely. I would say, yeah, the hats.
A little rough.
Yeah, some of them
are
awesome,
real
bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just depends. They also have like a lot of the newer sets. I think are a little better, but it just kind of depends. I had some World War One. I think Americans they did that were really good, but they had no faces. They just had like a blank. It was weird, and some of them at least they just had like it was like the Lewis gunners just had like no faces, so like a weird creepy spaceman, like like our Doctor Who episode where like an alien steals their faces or something.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so there's options out there, and I think people should go check them out. And if you're curious, stay tuned in the future because there'll definitely be more Nordic Weasel historical stuff. I have some pet projects that nobody will know what to do with.
Well, that sounds very promising.
Yeah, if you're really hardcore into the first Schleswig War, which everyone who's listening to this will go look up to find out what the fuck it is, there'll be good news for you in the future.
Damn.
I can safely say it'll be the definitive war game covering the period because it may also be the first.
The first, the only.
Absolutely. But yeah, that's I guess my defense of historical gaming. Why you should all like go buy yourself some Frenchmen and go shoot at the Germans.
All right, perfect. Historical is fun to paint. In a painting perspective, you get a lot of reference material, or you could just paint them however you want.
You can kind of make it up, but it is like really easy, and like it's an excuse to go out and buy a couple of Ospreys, which look good on your shelf. Yeah, there's like lots of painting guides, painting references, and again, like even if you don't get like every belt buckle and stuff, like who gives a shit? Like just get the uniforms and the helmet right, and you will like nobody will moan about it. They will look fine. Do the bases nice, like you said. Don't skimp on the bases.
Yeah, and if you got to do Napoleonics or something, don't do 28. Just don't do it.
Oh yeah, unless you're really, really certain about what you're doing. Yeah, go for or get the like 6mm, like the Bacchus or whatever.
Perfect.
Like, go little with those dudes. Listen, if you're like ancients.
Perfect. Well, I guess that concludes our stream for this time.
So hopefully, we will be back in maybe not 2 weeks exactly, because I'm pretty sure that makes it like Christmas Eve.
Actually, I'm challenging you to a stream on Christmas. I have a special guest, and our special guest is going to have a test for you and I.
Oh, okay.
We're going to test our abilities in the ways you have never been tested before, or maybe
I will definitely fail because I test terribly under pressure and also off pressure. But that's
it'll be funny though, and it's going to be a short one. We're not going to, do like a long Christmas.
Maybe we'll get a couple of
a little fun.
And,
yeah, exactly.
So, all right. Well, that sounds good. So we will totally have a thing in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
and then we will have a regular episode probably like the week after that.
Oh, nice.
Depending on how it all works out.
Yeah.
So holiday schedules could be a little dicey. So, but somewhere around there. Otherwise, we will be here in the new year, and we'll have new exciting things to talk about.
Woo.
So,
all right, hard up.
Hey, power of love. Hey, look at that.
All right, I'm gonna run the countdown. See you later. Bye.
Hey.